When I posted my hands-on with the Xperia 5 Mark V, I mentioned that it felt like a bit of a step back in a couple of ways. Fewer cameras, bigger bezels, and at least in the UK, based on the information I had, only one storage option. 128GB, which is not enough for me personally. But despite this, I would still pick up the Xperia 5 Mark V over the 5 Mark IV. It's arguably the best phone at its price in one key area that's incredibly important to me: the main camera. But there's one compromise for creators I haven't seen anyone report yet. Its screen is one of the lowest quality OLED displays that I've seen on a high-end phone in years. It's very power efficient and it's good enough for most people, but if you're after Sony's top quality display, the Xperia 5 Mark V just doesn't deliver that. Particularly, I'm talking about color shifting off angle when displaying light and mainly white content. All that makes the Xperia 5 Mark V a very different phone to the 5 Mark IV, and anything but an obvious upgrade. Now, this might sound dramatic. Practically speaking, when using the 5 Mark V as my main phone, I was very happy with it for the most part. Here in the UK, the Xperia 5 Mark V is £100 less than the 5 Mark IV was when it launched, so it's natural to expect some cost cutting. And so, this review has to cover the phone in isolation, but also as a potential upgrade for existing Xperia users. Before I dive into it, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do. It's how you stay on top of all our upcoming videos. Now though, let's get on with talking about the design, and the Xperia 5 Mark V feels great. Its flat metal sides are easy to grip, it bevels in slightly like the 1 Mark V, making the phone feel a little thinner than it is, and the matte glass back feels good and fends off fingerprints nicely. Sony always goes for a clean, minimalistic look for the camera, and the larger camera surround this time doesn't compromise there, but it does draw a little extra attention to that mighty main sensor, and I personally am here for it. Sony favorites like IP68 water resistance, the factor fingernail pulls out the SIM card and SD card tray, and there's a headphone jack, all those are back. And it's also easier to grip than the 5 Mark IV. The fingerprint scanner is also super responsive. The Xperia 5 Mark V is thicker than the 5 Mark IV though. It feels less sleek, and from the front, it has much chunkier bezels. Now, these bezels have been the cause of some controversy in the comments. Some people hating them, some people not caring about them. Honestly, I got used to them very quickly. Yes, it kind of sucks when you're thrown out of the illusion of owning an £850 phone when you put it against another phone of a similar price point like the Pixel 7 Pro, which has a curved screen or smaller tiny bezels. The Xperia 5 just looks a little bit more mid-range from the front. But day to day, the phone's still compact and manageable, so the bezels don't make it feel too chunky. It just looks clunky, especially when compared to other phones. What I did care about though was that screen. The Xperia 5 Mark IV had a great screen, awesome viewing angles, a little warm but totally customizable white balance, and it's a pleasure to watch content on. The Xperia 5 Mark V screen, however, is a bit worse when it comes to quality in my opinion, specifically when displaying white content, web pages, documents, a settings menu for example. There's more pronounced OLED color shifting when you tilt it left and right. Almost all OLEDs do this a little bit, but it's much more visible in cheaper panels. You don't get this with the Xperia 1 Mark V, you don't get it with an iPhone 14 Pro Max, and it's less pronounced on the 5 Mark IV. It isn't even visible on sub £600 phones like the Red Magic 8S Pro. You do, however, get it with the Xperia 5 Mark V and the Xperia 10 Mark V. Both the 10 and the 5 also have a pretty unique quirk. When you tilt them all the way off angle, the screens go totally blue. Now, you're never going to watch content like this, so it doesn't really matter too much practically, but it was just an interesting point I found. So is the Xperia 5 Mark V screen the same as the 10 Mark V? I don't think so. They aren't calibrated the same. The 5 Mark V is 120Hz, the 10 Mark V is 60Hz, and the 10's color shifting is a little bit more dramatic. How big a deal is this? You probably won't notice in bright environments. That's one of the reasons I didn't pick up on it in my initial review, as I was traveling a lot, but when you're indoors looking at light content, it is easy to see. And while it won't ruin a game or a movie, it will make reading a web page or a book or anything with a white background feel a little bit more like a mid-range viewing experience. There are some good things about the screen though. It gets bright enough for comfortable outdoor use, it's relatively sharp, blacks are deep and inky, and content looks great. The display settings also serve up a wellspring of options to customize the look, from Sony's creator mode for HDR and 10-bit content to custom white balance and other enhancements. So a lot of people probably won't care about that color shifting, but if you are coming from an Xperia 5, maybe don't expect a display upgrade. I did ask Sony about the new display, and while I'm waiting on comment on the color shifting specifically, Sony did confirm that the new screen is more power efficient, something that I definitely experienced. In fact, the improved battery life's another reason I'd pick up the Xperia 5 Mark V over the 5 Mark IV, even with its limitations. But the main one really is that camera, so let's get to it. If you've seen any Xperia 1 Mark V reviews, you'll know the main camera is pretty great. That's lucky, because the Xperia 5 Mark V and 1 Mark V have the same X-T for mobile camera at the helm. It's a 1/1.35 sensor with a 4.3:3 aspect ratio and 52 megapixel resolution. The wider aspect ratio helps with video stabilization, and it captures photos with a 48 megapixel resolution part of the sensor, that's 4:3, and all its photos are then pixel binned down to 12 megapixels. There's no option to capture 48 megapixel JPEGs or RAW photos. The Xperia 5 Mark V is the only way you'll get this new specific sensor at this price, and matched with Sony's 2023 photo processing, it captures really balanced photos and shoots great looking footage. While the Xperia 1 Mark V had some tough competition, including 1-inch sensor flagship alternatives like the Xiaomi 13 Ultra, which capture a shallower depth of field, the 5 Mark V's competition is more modest, capping out with phones like the Pixel 7 Pro and Asus Zenfone 10. I prefer the Xperia 5 Mark V's main camera and software to both those phones, putting it ahead of the pack camera-wise. The lack of a telephoto camera doesn't bother me personally because the main camera is so good, specifically compared to the 5 Mark IV. The Xperia 5 Mark V's zoomed in shots deliver higher resolve detail and dynamic range, and the only times the Xperia 5 Mark IV edged ahead was in the very best light when you're really punching in. Both phones also have similar depth of field when zooming in. Would I have liked a periscope camera on the 5 Mark V? Of course I would. But do I miss the 2.5 times zoom of the Xperia 5 Mark IV? No. Moving on to the ultra-wide, and Sony does a fairly good job of keeping noise down, given the sensor size, but crop in and you'll still see quite a bit of grain on photos taken indoors. It handles night photos well by exposing a little bit lower than the main camera in auto mode. Color balance on the ultra-wide can be thrown off in really dark scenes compared to the main camera, but you do get manual control, so you can tweak this as well. It's great to see the ultra-wide pack autofocus. It can focus as near as around 10 centimeters, pulling up pleasing amounts of blur. There's no super close macro focus, but I don't really mind that too much, as macro shots with ultra-wide cameras pull up a lot of shadows. I much prefer telephoto macro cameras like the Huawei P60 Pros. I've linked below to some of the photos I've taken on it so that you can really see how it stacks up. The new video creator app introduced on the 5 Mark V and rolling out to the Xperia 1 Mark V isn't available yet on my review device, so I can't talk about that in any detail. But I will talk about the Photo Pro app in a little bit more detail, as this is getting more and more powerful. You can shoot in portrait or landscape, even in manual mode now. Basic serves up quick access to 4K 120 frames per second video. Night mode fires up automatically and you can turn it off. The basic mode in Photo Pro app has become so powerful I lean on it more than I have ever done on a Sony phone. It isn't perfect. Sony's upgraded the bokeh mode and I found this to be really lackluster. It struggles in all but ideal conditions. Most premium Android phones do a better job, so don't expect too much there. I also want an on-screen shutter button when I'm in manual mode in landscape orientation. The tiny physical camera button introduces handshake, especially when the phone's on a tripod. Generally though, content captured on the Photo Pro app is as good as you're going to get for £850. And that's before you even come onto Cinema Pro and Video Pro. If you're wondering what a Cinetone video with a rear microphone active shot at night looks and sounds like, this is it. I've got the wind filter switched on. It's 4K 60 frames per second. Now, if you want to use the Video Pro app, which is what I'm using now, you can control things like which microphone you're using. You can shoot in HDR video, and then using a Cinetone, you can edit that footage after to get rid of a little bit of noise, but the ISO is still going to be high, so there will be quite a bit of grain in this kind of lighting. If you switch to the Cinema Pro app, that's when you're shooting in the cool Venice color profile, which is from Sony's film cameras. It also captures 21:9 content, and you can do awesome stuff like focus racking, so I can get an A point and a B point, and then I can have it gradually focus between the two, and you can do that between 0.1 second and 3 seconds. Sony phones are niche, but they are incredibly powerful. Speaking of power, it's time to move on to performance. Firstly, I didn't experience any overheating with this phone. Final Fantasy Ever Crisis just launched, so I've played that for about half an hour, Genshin Impact for a little longer, and other 2D and 3D games. And while frame rates weren't always gaming phone levels, my bigger concern, thermals, didn't raise any issues. We know there's some thermal throttling going on here, but I'd rather thermal throttling than a really hot phone. I didn't run into any major software issues either. The 8GB of RAM isn't a huge amount, but apps were kept open in the background for as long as I needed them to be, and the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chipset is a tried and tested champ, so kept things flowing smoothly. It also sounds fantastic, and there are all the Sony flagship audio settings to help you customize the sound to your ear. It's also one of a handful of phones with spatial audio from its onboard speakers as well as headphones. In my initial review, I mentioned that there was only a 128GB version. That was based on the information I had from Sony UK and applies to Europe too as far as I know. Since then though, I've learned that Sony Asia and probably other markets will be launching this phone with 256GB of storage. So the following criticism might not apply in your region, but if you're in the UK, it definitely does. I'm almost 3 weeks into using this phone and I've filled up over 100GB. I know I'm a special case as I install games so I can test the phone, but gamers will be in a similar situation, as will anyone who has a really big WhatsApp backup, for example. Apps and games need to be installed onto internal storage, so if you're in a region with a 256GB option, you're in luck. But if you're not, be aware, you'll definitely have to limit your oversized installs. If you've used the Sony phone before, you'll know exactly what to expect from the software. SideSense is back with quick access to split screen multitasking, and there's a generally clean interface. But I've got to call Sony out on its uncompetitive OS update promise. 2 years of OS updates and 3 years of security updates? Oppo offers 4 years of software updates and 5 years of security updates. Sony's doing a lot when it comes to sustainability hardware-wise, eco-conscious packaging. It kind of pioneered battery care as we know it today, and its phones don't even ship with cables, let alone a power brick. But it's time to extend that responsibility to long-lasting phone software. Okay, on to battery life, and this is another real high point for the Xperia 5 Mark V. In real world use, I hardly ever got to 6 PM with less than 40% remaining, which for me is impressive going. The phone doesn't charge quickly. I've never needed super fast charging, but if you do, you won't get it here. But more important for me, it lasts all day, and then some. This is partly down to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, Sony's thermal throttling, the new screen, and I'm sure I've missed other factors out, but the screen on time was so good. An hour of full HD video playback at about 60 to 70% brightness, and a few benchmarks only drained the Xperia 5 Mark V by 4%. By contrast, the Xperia 5 Mark IV lost 8% in the exact same test. I calibrated both screens to the same brightness, and yes, the Xperia 5 Mark IV looked better, especially off angle, but the extra screen on time really helped take the edge off the 5 Mark V's lower quality display. The Xperia 5 Mark V also has 30-watt PD3 wired charging and wireless charging too. GSM Arena pointed out in its review that charging speeds can vary based on ambient temperature, but I was getting a full charge in around 90 minutes using the Ugreen 140-watt power adapter with its Power Delivery 3.1 support. So there you have it. The Xperia 5 Mark V. This is a complicated phone. If you're in the UK, storage could be the biggest issue for you. If you're in Asia or a region with 256 gigabytes, price might be a bigger issue. It's the most affordable way to access Sony's new stacked sensor introduced on the Xperia 1 Mark V, and its camera apps are really powerful. Its battery life's also fantastic, and it has wireless charging and expandable storage, which I'm always a fan of. For anyone who values screen quality above all else, the Xperia 5 Mark V isn't the winner the Xperia 5 Mark IV was, and its bezels make it look like an Xperia 10 from the front. The lack of a telephoto camera might also turn off fans on the market for a powerful zoom lens, but compared to the 5 Mark IV, I didn't find it to be noticeably worse. All said and done, I've really enjoyed my time with the phone and have appreciated being able to rely on its camera and battery, even with the drawbacks when compared to other phones. Is the Xperia 5 Mark V a marriage of compromises or a winning combo? Let me know what you think in the comments section, and if you have any questions, please do ask. If you enjoyed this video, click that like button, and for more from me, subscribe to TechEdit and ding that bell. Thanks for watching.